34% unemployment, bank failures, and a severe drought, the governments of Japan, Germany, and Italy chose conquest as the solution. Nazi Germany invaded Poland in 1939, Western Europe in 1940, and then attacked the Soviet Union in 1941. In Asia, Japan invaded Manchuria in 1931, then China in 1937. To support China, the United States imposed oil and steel embargoes on Japan. This put Japan on a collision course with the United States that erupted into total war on December 7, 1941, when the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, then the Philippines, and Guam. The next day, the Congress of the United States declared war on the Empire of Japan. 2 days later, Germany and Italy declared war on the United States, which now found itself at war on two fronts. President Roosevelt advocated a Europe First strategy focused on defeating Nazi Germany and Italy as quickly as possible. Though the war in the Pacific would not wait, the bulk of available supplies and manpower were directed to the conflict in Europe. War in the Pacific would have to be waged initially with what power the U.S. already had in place. Only 4 months later, America responded with the Doolittle raid by attacking Japanese cities with army bombers launched from Navy carriers. In the Philippines, American and Filipino forces surrendered to the Japanese at Bataan. Then, a month later, the American garrison on Corregidor finally surrendered on May 6, 1942. Japan now controlled the Philippines. But also in May, the U.S. Navy successfully halted Japanese expansion toward Australia at the Battle of the Coral Sea. In early June of 1942, the U.S. took the initiative at the Battle of Midway when the Japanese lost 4 aircraft carriers. From this point forward, America would be on the offensive in the Pacific. Then in August, Marines landed on Guadalcanal. Other offensives followed on Bougainville, New Britain, and eventually New Guinea. In November 1942, U.S. Army and Allied forces landed in North Africa. The Axis forces surrendered in Tunisia the following May. In September 1943, the Allies landed in Italy, liberating Rome in early June 1944. Meanwhile, Allied forces sought to counter Japanese designs in the China-Burma-India theater of operations by supplying and supporting Chinese forces from bases in India, building roads through the Burmese jungles, and flying supplies over the Himalaya mountains. Due to supply and manpower shortages in the Pacific caused by the Europe First strategy, Admiral Nimitz adopted a plan that became known as island hopping. This involved bypassing certain Japanese-held islands deemed unnecessary to the advance across the Pacific, which stranded tens of thousands of Japanese soldiers on backwater islands surrounded by American forces. In November 1943, Marines destroyed the Japanese garrison on Tarawa in 3 days of intense fighting. Early in 1944, U.S. forces wrested control of the Marshall Islands from the Empire of Japan. From these outlying Pacific islands, the U.S. established vital air bases and naval anchorages. On June 6, 1944, U.S. Army and Allied forces landed at Normandy, opening a second front against the Nazis in Europe. Germany surrendered the following May. Also in June 1944, U.S. forces invaded Saipan in the Mariana Islands, then Guam and Tinian in August. This brought the Allies closer to the Philippines and provided airfields to support strategic bombing of Japan. In September 1944, Marines and Army troops endured 3 months of bitter fighting against the Japanese stronghold on Peleliu. The enemy had changed their defensive tactics by digging into bunkers and caves. Finally, in October, Allied forces began the long process of liberating the Philippines. During the campaign, kamikazes made their debut. The Allied drive through the Central Pacific continued in February 1945, when Marines hit the beach at the island fortress of Iwo Jima. It was the first battle in the Pacific in which American casualties outnumbered Japanese. Okinawa was the last battle of World War II. Knowing their home islands were the next invasion target, the Japanese strategy called for making conquering Okinawa so costly it would diminish the Americans' will to continue the fight. After victory at Okinawa, Allied leaders called for Japan to surrender unconditionally or face destruction. Japan would not, so President Truman authorized the use of atomic bombs. One detonated over Hiroshima August 6th and another over Nagasaki August 9th. This convinced the Japanese emperor to surrender. On September 2nd, aboard USS Missouri, the Allies formally accepted the Japanese surrender, bringing World War II to a close. In order to understand how it came to this, we must first examine the seeds of conflict in the Pacific by looking into the history between China and Japan during the 19th century.
Okay, so exciting. Come to the museum. All right. I'm just going to get the power cord. Okay. No, it's black. Was it? Did I have